Hi, this is Rachel. I am going to go ahead and give you a recorded lecture about the first grade content based on the Georgia Standards of Excellence. So from the Georgia Standards document, this is a summary of what first graders are going to be doing. They're going to be looking at magnets, shadows, sound, doesn't say light, but also light, weather, and the needs of plants and animals. Some things that you might expect your kindergartners to do are to use whole numbers and also create drawings that represent ideas. So then we have the last one was plants and animals, and basically I divide this up into two kind of concepts, plants and animals. So A and B are just about plants, and then C is about plants or animals. Again, C is kind of your endpoint. It's your problem. They've kind of given it to you, and so what you need to know is, what the plants are you're going to study or your students are going to study. The students need to know what would it need to meet its needs, and you can categorize those into parts, which is, air, water, light, and nutrients for plants, and air, water, food, and shelter. Now, I would actually argue that plants need shelter. I mean, every living thing has a habitat. So but shelter we kind of think of as like just something over the top of something that would protect it from the elements. But even though we don't use the word for shelter for plants, it's good to remember that plants need a habitat. So even if you have a great big oak tree, if it's not in the correct habitat, it won't survive either. And then this is the common thing, parts of a plant, root, stem, leaf, and flower. So the only thing I really want to talk about are the kind of the parts of the plant, because that's something that I think students end up with some misconceptions of. Here are some big ideas before I get to that. This is about plants. One of the things is plants don't get their food from the soil. They do get nutrients and water. And nutrients aren't food. Nutrients are like dissolved minerals. So anything that can dissolve in the water. Plants do get their energy from the sun. They actually make their food from air and energy from the sun. So they don't get it from the soil. And just roots and stems are pretty clear. Now, not all plants have roots and stems, so mosses don't have roots and stems. You don't need to get into that, but you want to just avoid saying that all plants have roots and stems because they don't. And actually, not all plants have flowers. So when you think about it, you're going to describe it as the parts of a flowering plant. So mosses aren't flowering plants, and pine trees aren't flowering plants. And so there are exceptions. So when you're discussing plants, talk about flowering plants. Now, most plants actually are flowering plants, even if you don't see the flower. Sometimes the flower is really, really small. And so there are a few exceptions to flowering plants. So there's kind of two ways to think about this. One is most plants are flowering plants, and you may not see the flower, but it has one. And the other is the idea is that not all plants are flowering plants. And some of our biggest plants are not flowering plants. So I just wanted to show you, and the last thing was just remember that plants are alive in the winter. So the plants don't have flowers all the time, they don't have leaves all the time, and just because it doesn't have those things doesn't mean that it's dead. So these were some videos, and let me just see. So let me see if I can pull up. I wanted to pull up this picture here. I don't know if it'll come up. Anyway, so a phenomenon I find is that we see a lot of oak, like acorns, and as a result you see a lot of baby oak trees. And I just got kind of curious about acorns and like the flowering plant. So an oak tree is a flowering plant. And so I went to this site here, and we know about the pollen. The pollen is a male flowering plant. But here we probably don't even notice where acorns come from. So they come from this little part here. So it's not always obvious, again, on even this big tree where the flowering plant is. And so I just kind of got some little references about acorn to trees, and there's some really nice little videos because we talk about flowers, and we're kind of like, what's the purpose of a flower? When we say, oh, it's the, maybe even talk about like fertilization. Hold on a second. But I want you to understand that the purpose of the flower, like the flower really produces the seed. So I want to go ahead and I'm going to play this really quickly. I don't know if it's really quickly, but let's see if we can. Mm, there are just some really nice things out here. So you can see that even like having little tiny oak trees in around your schoolyard, which I'm sure you have, is a phenomenon. And so basically that's everything. It's about 23 minutes into this. And oh, I'm sorry, then there's animals. So animals are actually way simpler, I think, than plants. Air, food, water, and shelter. Air, water, food, and shelter. And the idea is that you can't give the same food to the same animals. And so again, just remembering that even if an animal is not taken care of by us, it's also still getting its food, water, and shelter from outdoors. So and again, if you're thinking about what do you want animal people and your students to know, you might want them to know about specific animals. You might want them to know about cats or fish or things like that. You know, the fish get their air from the water. You may not. I mean, it's pretty much up to you what the content is that you want students to learn, but you want to make sure you're within these big ideas. So I just want to just kind of bring back this idea before I do end up, which is that you're going to hear some terms like conceptual storyline, project-based and problem-based learning, and also GRASPs. And GRASP was actually in the old GPS. So you can actually go to the old GPS and find some nice things, some nice big projects. So for example, the one about the seasons, you know, pick your favorite season, or if you think that we should have a class pet, what would be the pros and cons, or what we need to have this class pet? What do you need to do to meet its, you know, needs? Um, and then, but the kind of the idea is that we start linking instead of going to the end and linking it and saying like study like little tiny little skits. We go ahead and we make it a big overarching storyline. So kind of a more of a thematic, but based on authentic problems or phenomena. So again, that's everything for first grade. I think I marked a couple of the GPS that I thought were still good, even though they're not for the Georgia standards. And some of them might be very good still, but I just, if you haven't gone and you know, you're teaching, you never taught kindergarten or first grade and you want to know what that looks like, there's a lot of really great information in these frameworks that were written by teachers. So those are their links, and I'm going to go ahead and upload the PowerPoint so you can go to those links as hot links for anything that I showed today.